Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the fourth in this installment of People Science in Session. Once again, I'm your host, Ben Lind, and I'm really pleased again to be joined by our Director of People Science, Ryan Tahmassebi. Ryan, good morning.
Morning, Ben. How are you doing?
I am great, thank you. How are you?
Good, not too bad.
So over this series, we've looked at important things such as why you should build a survey, how you can personalize it, how you can get better buy-in from other parts of the business by involving them in that initial strategy. We've looked at how to launch, ways in which you can kind of help to improve response rates as you go along. And we've also looked at kind of the importance of communicating to your organization the various stages at which they can expect to see some changes off the back of them having given their feedback. So I think it's only fitting that we spend this last episode kind of diving a little bit more deeply into how you can effectively start to make those changes that have been suggested off the back of your employee data. So Ryan, if you want to kick us off, I know that's a big way to start, but what are some kind of easy ways that any practitioners watching can start to kind of harness the power of that employee feedback and bring some changes into their organization?
Yeah, I mean, it is a big question, isn't it? Because it's the area where organizations struggle the most. I think every organization knows how to kind of set up and get a survey out there. Obviously, what we've talked about over this series is how to do that in a way that ensures you're asking the right questions and in a way that ensures you can get the most kind of buy-in and participation from your managers and all colleagues. But this kind of idea of turning the insight into action has been the sticking point for practitioners and organizations for years now, not decades. So everything we've talked about previously has all been, yes, to drive participation and interest in the survey, but also to ensure that the insight, once the survey does close and you're going in and you're having a look at what people have said, it is more relevant to what's going on in the organization at the moment. So a big part of having better action planning conversations is getting better insight. So hopefully if you follow those pieces of advice, you're going to have given yourself a better starting position for the action planning conversations anyway, but also the things we talked about in terms of including managers and employees in the almost kind of co-designing some of those surveys or elements of the surveying approach. Again, that's going to perhaps ensure that they've got a bit more motivation to get involved in the action planning conversation, understand what the results are saying once it closed, but also kind of communicating before the survey launches and as soon as it closes when those follow-up conversations are going to be happening. All of those things are almost the proactive kind of pre-work, the groundwork that you can put in place ahead of the action planning conversations. But then still, once we get to it, that can often be the challenge, because even if you do have that momentum and that energy, when you've got 1,000 different things going on inside the organization, how can you ensure proper follow through? How can you ensure that the action planning moves from deciding on doing something to actually implementing it and embedding it to the point where it becomes the new normal or business as usual, whatever term we use. So, and kind of the answer to that, or one of the answers to that, is it has to be simple and achievable. So how many times have we closed employee surveys in the past with 50, 60, 70 questions on an engagement survey, and obviously looked at the data and thought, right, we've got these 10, 15 point action plans that we need to pull together to address all of this stuff. And then there's that constant kind of almost pressure that's being applied to managers through the year, like chasing them. How far have you got with this? Where have you got to with this? Have you done this? Have you done that? And it's rub an unhealthy tension, that, because often what we've talked about is the fact that what you're asking managers to do, what managers feel they've been asked to do with a 10 or 15 point action plan, is not achievable with everything else they've got going on. And or they might also be, not fully bought into what some of those actions are because of everything we've already talked about in terms of, where their mindset is and how they're thinking about this. So, got to keep it super simple. Would you rather, as a practitioner, make one change across your business or within certain parts of your business that have a really positive impact on people, or come up with a 10-point action plan that looks impressive from the outset? We're going to tackle all of these things, but actually all you ever do is nudge one or two of them forward ever so slightly. You'd probably choose the former. So what can we do with that? It's about giving managers the confidence, the framework, and the skills to facilitate really good action planning conversations within their teams, to unearth that one priority action that everyone believes will make the biggest difference, and to then have that discussion around, well, what could that look like? How could we go about implementing that? It's almost that appreciative inquiry type approach of what's the ideal, what's the thing that could make a massive change, right? Okay, well, what could that look like? How do we start to actually work towards that and design that and deliver that and implement it, and then evaluate whether it's been successful or not? That's a kind of really simple structure that we can give managers so that they can facilitate those action planning conversations within their teams. And just focusing on that will make it feel so much more achievable. And what that will mean and what that will result in is people who have got belief in, because they've been included in it. Again, it's an action that they've come up with, but also because it feels achievable, there'll be a belief and an energy behind driving that, rather than there's no way we're going to be able to do all of these things. Like what you're asking, these 10 things I need to try and do, that's not achievable. And then you just, that's where you start to run into blockers and barriers.
And I suppose with it being, if you focus on like one or two things that were going to be sort of seen as your P1s with regards to what you're going to deliver, I would suggest it's probably much easier to get like the collective energy of everybody behind that as well, rather than having kind of people being pulled in different directions by their priorities.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the manager or a leader is, what is their role in this? For me, you would want them to be a facilitator and maybe ultimate decision maker. Mm-hmm. But to make the best decision, they need the ideas and the suggestions from the people who know them, know the business, know the team, know the colleagues, know the customers, know the product really well. So I always think that managers and leaders almost kind of either put the pressure on themselves, or they think that because they're a leader, it's like a status driven, I need to make the decision here, I have the power to make the decision here, this is what I think we should do. That's a natural approach which comes out. But actually, it's about saying to leaders and managers, you don't have to take all of that pressure onto your shoulders to look at a data set and think, right, they have said this, I think this is the right way to go about it. They're in a better position to make a decision, a more informed decision, a decision that they'll have more confidence in, if before they make a decision, they actually explore the data and the themes that are coming out of the data with their team. So, well, what do you think would be the best way to go about this? What do you think would be the most impactful change? Get ideas and suggestions from people in the know, and then pull all of that information together with your own thoughts and opinions as a manager. And then you'll feel far more confident about the decision you're making. So I think there's something there for managers and leaders about almost coaching them and encouraging them not to be reactive to data once survey closes. That instant, what are people saying about me? What are people saying about the team? Right, we're going to do this. Take your time, explore it with your team. And then the decisions that you make and the actions that you decide to move forward with will likely be far more impactful.
So it's almost like this kind of, it's like the circle, right? So like you get people's buy-in when it comes to the strategy and the questions that are going to be asked. You then sort of carry that out, communicate to them when they're going to be back involved in sort of the actions off the back of it. But then again, you're kind of fostering that culture of collaboration when it actually comes to making actions off the back of it. So you're sort of going through this cycle of getting buy-in, making sure that people know what's expected of them, kind of delivering that part of the process, and then communicating what the next actions are, but then getting buy-in again, and kind of so on and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like a lot of conversations and a lot of, people need to be involved in it. But that inclusion and collaboration is super important to creating shared ownership for engagement and experience. Because if it's always decided by a group of HR practitioners and then a group of leaders and managers in terms of, firstly the questions we ask, then, the data is sent out to leaders and managers. They decide, right, we're going to do this. And then you go back around to doing another survey. It's, that's not going to foster adult type culture and, really inclusive culture, and one where people are having really great quality conversations, two-way conversations all of the time. So for me, it's about, the organizations thinking about, the culture that they're really trying to create inside their organizations. What are the behaviors and mindsets that are really going to enable them to kind of foster that culture and nurture that culture? And usually they'll come to the conclusion that they want somewhere where it can be adult. There can be really great, honest conversations. It is highly inclusive, and everything we've been talking about here is just trying to encourage that inclusive, highly collaborative work environment, and knowing that as a result of that, you'll be able to foster higher levels of trust inside the organization as well.
Yeah. And I'm just to play devil's advocate here, because I think that I feel for whenever I'm kind of sit on bits of content like this, if it's more related to me, let's say, I always have like a couple of bits in my mind where I'm like, oh, but what about, or, oh, but what have you considered? And I think, to me, if I'm looking at it with my line manager's hat on, right, rather than sort of, somebody who's passionate about creating good, experiences at work, and those two things aren't mutually exclusive, I appreciate. Do you often come up against the objection, whether it be from practitioners making excuses for managers or managers themselves? How frequently do you hear, oh, we just don't have the time for that. They're too busy doing their day-to-day, so we can't take time off them to do this kind of stuff. Do you hear that frequently, or is that just a lazy objection?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it's not a lazy objection, but you definitely hear it a lot. Mm-hmm. So it's, for me, that's short-term thinking. So, if you were to take that time to have those conversations with your colleagues and ensure that the feedback action kind of loops work really well, what impact is that going to have over the long term in terms of feelings of engagement, productivity, performance, energy within your teams? So I always do find that a bit of a kind of a lazy objection, yes, but sometimes just being too short-term in your thinking and your approach. And it's always the same, isn't it? How many times do we move one-to-ones that we have scheduled with our managers, or our managers rescheduling them with their colleagues, rather, because they something else more pressing or more urgent has come up and they need to move it. Mm-hmm. And it's straight away you're kind of saying that an individual's performance, development, motivation, well-being, energy at work isn't as important as whatever's just dropped onto your plate. And it's the same kind of idea here. What would we be saying if we were saying, well, we don't have the time to sit down with our teams and explore what's coming out from the survey results and how to move it forward? Essentially what you're saying is it's not important, or it's not as important as these 3 projects that we're working towards at the moment. And I think sometimes you just need to think a little bit longer term and think about cultural impact of having those better conversations, and what more that's going to unlock in terms of the potential within your team and the dynamic within your teams. So that's always how I would respond. But again, I often think that the objections don't come from laziness. The objections come from a lack of confidence in how to deliver it.
Right.
So to come up with a reason to not do it feels easier than to hold your hand up and say, I don't feel confident doing this. Mm-hmm. So for practitioners, it's all about coaching the managers and giving them a really simple language and framework to host these conversations within their teams. Make it feel easy for them, and you'll see the difference in how open they are to delivering it.
And who knows, folks, maybe that might be, we'll do that over the next couple of videos. We'll look at some hacks for that kind of thing. That could be what we look to do. But I mean, look, for me, that feels like a really good place to leave it for this particular episode, Ryan, unless you have anything else that you'd care to drop in just before we stop.
No, I think we could look to do something like that in terms of some specifics for how you can give managers that confidence and that framework to be able to do that. But I think we'll look at doing a kind of maybe an online workshop or an online webinar around that in a little bit more detail, so that we can actually give some kind of some inspiration, some toolkits, some techniques to practitioners who'd like to give it a try, or would like to share something with their managers so that they can give it a try.
Excellent. Coming to a Zoom near you, everybody. But that'll do for this week. People Science in Session. Ryan, thank you very much.
Cheers, Ben. Thank you.
And thank you all for watching. See you next time.